The air in Atlanta has been heavy for months, and by the time the cameras started rolling, you could feel that something inside Scrappy had snapped. This wasn't the same man we've seen smiling through tension, cracking jokes to lighten the mood, or forcing himself into the role of middleman when the Frosts and the Harrises refused to let their pride go. Tonight, everything about his energy was different. From the very first frame, you could hear it in the weight of his voice. His words didn't have to be loud. His body language didn't need theatrics. Just the way he leaned back in his chair, shoulders tight, eyes locked, told the entire room he was done. He wasn't carrying other people's grudges anymore. He wasn't smoothing over family drama that didn't belong to him. The line had been crossed, and Scrappy was ready to draw it so deep it would scar. For years, the producers at VH1 had fed on this feud like wolves circling raw meat. Every reunion episode, every vacation special, every group dinner had turned into a battlefield. The moment Kirk Frost and Mendes' Harris stepped into the same space, and always at the center of the storm was Scrappy, dragged in whether he wanted it or not, forced to juggle friendships, loyalty, and his own sanity, while everyone else slung mud. He tried to play peacemaker once. He begged them to squash the beef, to move forward, to remember that Atlanta was big enough for all of them to breathe without colliding. But peace doesn't pay. Chaos does, and so every clash got messier, every insult dug deeper, until Scrappy was drowning in baggage that was never his to begin with. The cameras caught him scanning the room, like a man who had finally realized he'd been screaming into a void. Nobody was listening. Nobody cared about how much it drained him. They only cared about who could outshout the other, who could land the nastiest blow, who could keep the feud alive for one more episode. Scrappy finally broke the silence, his voice low but sharp. I don't ever want y'all to feel like I'm picking sides. I just want people to be in a good space. But it's like every time we plan something, we got to ask, do we invite the Frosts or do we invite the Harrises? The weight of that line sat heavy. It wasn't just about a trip to Puerto Rico or a dinner party gone wrong. It was about grown adults turning every gathering into a battleground and forcing everyone else to pay the price. Mendes Harris tried to defend himself, but his words felt more like gasoline thrown on open flames. His voice cracked with frustration as he reminded them that when he slipped, the entire room piled on top of him. But when Yandandy Smith slipped, she had a wall of women shielding her, ready to excuse, defend, and protect. His tone was raw, desperate, and unfiltered. We can't win. He wasn't just speaking about his marriage. He was calling out the entire imbalance of their world, the double standards, the weight that men like him had to carry, while women could stumble and still land on their feet. Whether the room agreed or not, his exhaustion was undeniable. And then there was Kirk Frost, standing there with the arrogance of a man who somehow believes the past can't touch him. If hypocrisy were a sport, Kirk would be undefeated. This is the man who humiliated Rashida on national television, dragging her through scandal after scandal. The cheating, the side baby with Jasmine Washington, the countless betrayals that should have ended everything years ago. Yet here he was pointing his finger at Mendes, lecturing another man about loyalty, as if his own marriage wasn't limping from the very wounds he created. It was almost laughable, and the look on Scrappy's face showed he thought so too. But the wildest part, Rashida was still right there, standing firm by her husband's side, like stone, loyal, unshaken, and unwilling to admit that the man she defended was built on contradictions. That loyalty was powerful, but it made her look blind, maybe even complicit, in the hypocrisy that dripped from every word Kirk spoke. In the middle of it all, Youngjak played his usual role, the accidental troublemaker. His jokes, his casual remarks, his way of carrying whispers from one side of the room to the other might not have been meant to stir chaos, but they always did. He didn't realize that every time he repeated a comment or delivered a joke laced with truth, he was adding fuel to a fire already raging out of control. And every time the flames rose higher, it was Scrappy who got caught in the crossfire. Jock laughed it off. Scrappy suffered for it. And that's why tonight was different. Scrappy leaned back, shaking his head, his voice steady, but filled with exhaustion that no man could fake. I be tired, man. I'm tired of this. Y'all keep dragging this out like it's never going to end. We grown. Handle y'all problems without putting me in it. The cameras caught the silence that followed. And for once, silence spoke louder than chaos. No one expected him to check Kirk Frost like that. Not with cameras rolling. Not with Rashida staring daggers across the table. But Scrappy didn't blink. He wasn't here to play safe anymore. He said what everybody else had been too afraid to say out loud. This feud was tired, toxic, and pointless. What made it even more powerful was the calm in his tone. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't storming out like a man throwing a tantrum. His stillness was scarier than a scream. Because when a man like Scrappy, a man who's been through divorces, betrayals, courtroom battles, and public humiliation, finally says he's done, you know it's real. His silence wasn't weakness. It was finality, and the room felt it. But instead of taking that truth and sitting with it, the same cycle kicked back in. Kirk deflected, pushing blame onto Mendez's, like a magician trying to redirect attention away from his own failures. Rashida stared in silence, refusing to admit her husband had a point to answer for. Mendez bristled, defensive, and ready to throw words back at anyone who challenged him. Yandendi clutched her pride like a shield, waiting for the next blow, and Jock cracked another joke to keep the awkwardness from choking him. Everyone was so wrapped in their own defense mechanisms that they missed what had just happened. Scrappy had become a mirror, and what they saw reflected back wasn't pretty. The cameras caught it all, the sighs, the stares, the uncomfortable silence. The raw moment when a man who had been the glue for years finally admitted he was breaking. For once, this wasn't about who cheated, who lied, or who skipped someone's party. This was about a man refusing to play the fool any longer. His final words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. This beef is tired. Handle yourselves before you come at anybody else. The question now is whether anyone in that room truly heard him. Did Kirk Frost process that his own skeletons scream louder than his lectures? Did Mendez Harris realize that his war with Yandi had become a public circus that dragged everyone else into the ring? Did Rashida and Yandi understand that their loyalty, while admirable, might be the very thing fueling the chaos instead of stopping it? Or are they all so addicted to the spotlight, so consumed by the storylines, that Scrappy's breaking point will just become another clip, another meme, another headline for VH1 to cash in on? Because here's the truth. Scrappy wasn't bluffing. The look in his eyes told a story the words couldn't. He was ready to step away from it all. From the mess, the drama, the cameras, even the friendships, if it meant saving himself. And if that happens, if Scrappy really walks away from this battlefield, then who's left to carry the dirty laundry between the Frosts and the Harrises? Who becomes the messenger when the middleman burns the bridge? The silence that followed Scrappy's words didn't just end that night. It lingered. By the time the group met again, you could feel the aftershocks vibrating through the room. Atlanta is a big city, but in this circle, word travels faster than any headline. And everyone had already heard about Scrappy checking Kirk Frost in front of cameras. People walked in expecting a storm. The first to arrive was Rashida, polished as always, standing by her husband's side like nothing could shake her loyalty. Kirk trailed beside her, his chin high, his pride intact, pretending that he hadn't been embarrassed on tape. That's Kirk's signature move. Act like the blow never landed. Act like he's still in control, even when his face tells a different story. When Yandandi Smith-Harris and Mendez-Harris entered, the energy shifted again. Yandandi carried herself with her usual poise, scanning every corner like she knew all eyes were waiting for her. Mendez walked stiff, heavy, a man still simmering over years of judgment. They didn't need to say a word. The tension moved with them. And then came Scrappy, his presence quieter, but sharper than before. He wasn't explosive now. He didn't need to be. He had already said his piece, and his silence spoke louder than anyone else's chatter. The moment Scrappy and Kirk locked eyes, the room froze. There were no handshakes, no fake smiles, just a thick air you could slice through with a knife. Young Jock tried to play his role, tossing out a joke about the tension being so thick you could spread it on toast. A couple of nervous laughs followed, but no one relaxed. Scrappy didn't even glance at him. His focus was on Kirk, and Kirk smirked like a man who refused to back down. Kirk smirked like a man who refused to back down. The conversation started light. Music, families, casual updates. But it didn't take long for the real cracks to show. Kirk made a slick comment about loyalty, about knowing who's really solid when the cameras are off. It wasn't loud, it wasn't direct, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Scrappy leaned forward, his tone steady, but piercing. Loyalty don't mean nothing if you ain't loyal to yourself first. Don't talk to me about loyalty when you ain't handled yours at home. The words hit the room like a hammer. Rashida stiffened, her face tightening as if willing Scrappy to stop before he went too far. Yandi's eyes widened, covering her mouth like she was holding back a gasp. Jock muttered under his breath, "Here we go again," and Mendez leaned back in his chair, half smirking, almost relieved that for once, it wasn't him taking the hit. Kirk's pride wouldn't let him stay quiet. He shot back with his usual arrogance. "Don't get it twisted. I don't answer to you. I built mine. I kept mine. And I don't need nobody telling me how to run my household." But his voice cracked just enough to reveal the bruise Scrappy had hit. Scrappy didn't blink. He knew exactly where the weak spot was, and he had no fear pressing on it. The back and forth didn't explode into a screaming match, but it didn't need to. The weight of what was being said carried more fire than raised voices ever could. Scrappy wasn't just talking to Kirk. He was calling out the entire system. The years of enabling. The way this group let hypocrisy slide for the sake of appearances. He was tired of being the glue for a circle that thrived on chaos. And tonight, he made it clear. By the time the night ended, nothing had been solved. The Frost left first, Kirk whispering sharply to Rashida as she kept her face stone cold. Yandandi and Mendez followed, their pride still intact, but their nerves rattled. Jock stayed behind, cracking jokes that nobody really laughed at. And Scrappy, he sat in silence, unbothered, a man who had finally broken free from being everyone's messenger. He wasn't carrying it anymore, but with Scrappy stepping back, the balance was gone. The Frosts and the Harrises would now have to face each other directly, without a middleman to soften the blows. And that was the kind of danger that could turn a feud into an explosion. The fallout didn't take weeks to show. It was immediate. The moment Scrappy pulled himself out of the middle, the cracks widened into gaps too big to ignore. Without him as the buffer, the Frost and the Harrises had no shield, no filter, no cushion to soften the blows. The next group event didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like a standoff. Every chair, every glance, every pause in conversation carried the weight of unfinished business. Kirk Frost walked in first, chest puffed up like a man who believed nothing could shake him. His pride wouldn't let him show the bruise Scrappy had left. He smiled for the cameras, straightened his jacket, and acted like the whole world was still under his control. Rashida followed, polished as always, her face unreadable. Her silence was loyalty wrapped in armor, the same mask she had worn through years of betrayal, humiliation, and whispered doubts. To her, standing by Kirk was second nature. Even when the loyalty came at the cost of her own peace, Mendez Harris came in tight, his body language tense, his jaw locked, his eyes sharp and locked on Kirk like a man holding grudges too heavy to keep bottled much longer. Every step he took carried the weight of someone who'd been villainized too many times. Someone who had watched others escape accountability while his mistakes were dragged through fire. Yandandi Smith walked in beside him with her chin high, her presence commanding the room. She wasn't here to be shaken. She was here to remind everyone that she didn't bend, no matter how messy the storm got. And then came Scrappy, quiet, steady, dangerous. He didn't have to raise his voice or crack a joke. The silence around him was louder than anything he could have said. This was a man who had burned the role of middleman, who had decided he wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. When he sat down, the shift was instant. Everyone felt it. He wasn't here to save face for anyone, wasn't here to carry whispers from one side to the other. His stillness was the warning. Play your games, but leave him out. The first few minutes were coded in awkward small talk. Music, business, family, but it was all filler. A weak attempt to mask the tension bubbling beneath the surface. It didn't last long. Kirk's pride wouldn't let him sit quietly. He slid in a slick line about loyalty, about knowing who your real friends are when the cameras shut off. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even direct, but the meaning was clear. His words were aimed at Scrappy. Scrappy leaned forward, his voice calm, but cutting through the air like a knife. Loyalty don't mean nothing if you ain't loyal to yourself first. Don't talk to me about loyalty when you ain't even handled yours at home. The words froze the room. Rashidita stiffened immediately, her eyes narrowing, her lips pressed tight like she wanted to stop the moment before it went too far. Yandandi covered her mouth, holding back a gasp. Jock muttered under his breath, "Man, here we go again." Trying to laugh, but failing, and Mendez leaned back, almost smirking, relieved that for once, the shot wasn't aimed at him. Kirk tried to hold his ground, his pride refusing to break. His response came sharp, defensive. "Don't get it twisted. I don't answer to you. I built mine. I kept mine. And I don't need nobody telling me how to run my household." His voice was firm, but the slight crack in his tone betrayed him. Scrappy didn't blink. He leaned back, shaking his head, muttering, "You're going to learn." That single line hit harder than any argument. It was the warning of a man who had nothing left to lose. Young Jock tried once again to lighten the mood, but this time, his jokes landed flat. The camera caught his nervous smile fading when Scrappy's eyes cut across the table. Jock realized quickly, this wasn't the same Scrappy who used to let things slide. The middleman was gone. By the time the night ended, nothing was solved. The Frost left first, Kirk whispering sharply to Rashida, while she kept her face cold. Her loyalty still fixed, even as the tension burned through her silence. The Harrises followed, their pride still intact, but clearly shaken, their footsteps heavy as they walked out. Jock lingered, making side comments nobody laughed at, knowing full well the next episode would make him look like the fool. Scrappy stayed seated. He didn't chase anyone, didn't explain himself, didn't try to piece together what was already broken. He sat calm, collected, almost untouchable. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying anyone else's baggage. He wasn't the messenger, wasn't the glue, wasn't the peacemaker. He was done. And that's what scared everyone most. Because without Scrappy in the middle, the Frosts and the Harrises would have to face each other head-on. No filter, no mediator, no one to clean up after the explosion. And when pride, loyalty, and years of resentment collide with no one in the middle to absorb the blow, the blast is inevitable. The cameras cut as the credits rolled. But the tension didn't end there. It followed them out the door, into their cars, into the whispers of Atlanta nightlife, and onto the timelines of fans waiting to pick sides. Scrappy had dropped the bomb. Now the only question left hanging in the air was simple. Without him, who's going to survive the war? Who's going to survive the war? Going to survive the war? Who's going to survive the war?